Union, Missouri, population barely 10,000. A place where people lock their doors early and stories pass quietly from porch to porch. At the far end of Church Street, there stood a house the locals didn't speak of. A hulking relic of another century, dressed in rot and silence. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to touch, but never enter. In the fall of 2001, Steven LaChance, a father of 3, was desperate for a home. His family had little, and the house was big and cheap. Too cheap. He signed the lease without asking questions. But some houses don't want to be lived in. And this one had waited long enough. The screams hadn't started yet. But the house was awake, and it was listening. The first hours in the house felt strangely hollow. The kind of silence that seems to hold its breath. Steven and his kids unpacked in near quiet. Even the laughter of children felt swallowed by the thick, stale air. Every footstep echoed, as if the house had grown used to being empty, and resented the change. In the living room, the youngest paused mid-play, staring into the hallway. "Daddy, someone's in there," she whispered. But the hallway was empty. Or so it seemed. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the shadows grew longer, reaching, curling, shifting in unnatural ways. The air turned colder, though the furnace was running. And in the kitchen, a box fell on its own. Steven laughed it off. But deep down, he already knew. Something in the house was watching. That night, sleep came slowly, and not at all for Steven. The creaks of the old house seemed louder in the dark. Rhythmic, like footsteps pacing just beyond the bedroom door. At 2:13 a.m., the hallway light flickered, though no one had touched the switch. Then came the tapping. Soft at first. Like fingers brushing wood. Then firmer, knuckles rapping steadily on the bedroom door. Steven rose to check. No one was there. But as he returned to bed, he saw it. A long, thin shadow crawling along the wall, stretching against the grain of the light, as if cast by something that shouldn't be. The child beside him whimpered in her sleep. And from somewhere deep within the house, a low, guttural whisper. "Leave." The next day brought no peace. The children were quiet, pale, avoiding the back rooms. One of them whispered, "The house is talking again." At first, Steven dismissed it as imagination. Stress. Adjustment. But that evening, as the wind howled outside, he heard it too. Voices. Faint, broken, like someone murmuring prayers behind the walls. He pressed his ear to the plaster. The sound grew louder. Urgent. Dozens of whispers overlapping in a tongue he couldn't understand. And then, suddenly, silence. Followed by a knock from inside the wall. Steven stumbled back, heart racing. The wall pulsed, just once, as if something had pressed against it from the other side. The house was speaking. And it was beginning to scream. For days, the family avoided the basement. The landlord had warned them, "Don't mess with the breaker box, I'll handle it." But on the 5th night, the door creaked open on its own. Steven found it ajar, despite being latched. From below came a cold draft that smelled of earth, and something fouler. The air felt wrong. Not just cold, oppressive. He stood there, staring into the black, unable to see the bottom of the stairs. The light switch flicked, but no bulb answered. And then, a sound. Not rats. Not wind. Breathing. Heavy, deliberate, like something waiting in the dark. Behind him, one of the children whispered, "Daddy, someone's down there." Steven slammed the door shut, heart pounding. But the breathing continued, on the other side of the door. By the third week, it wasn't just the noises. It was the feeling of being watched. Of something creeping around the edges of your mind. The children began whispering names in their sleep. Strange names, names they had never heard. At first, Steven thought it was just their imagination running wild, but the house seemed to know things, too much. One night, as Steven flipped through a family album, his daughter's voice called out from behind him. "Daddy, who's the man in the picture?" He turned. His daughter was pointing at a photo, one he hadn't noticed before. A man standing in the background. But it wasn't just any man. It was the same shadow that had appeared in their hallway. And when Steven checked the photo again, the man's eyes were crossed out in dark ink, just like the shadows in their home. That night, the house's patience ran out. The air grew heavy with something dark, as if the very walls were pressing in on them. Steven had just closed his eyes when the scream tore through the house. A woman's scream. Loud. Unhuman. It echoed from the back of the house, rattling the windows and shaking the floorboards. The children bolted from their rooms, crying out in fear. "Daddy, please. What is it?" The scream came again, sharp and guttural, as if it were coming from deep beneath the floor, not a person, but something more. Steven ran toward the source, but as he reached the hallway, the screaming stopped abruptly. All that remained was the oppressive silence. And a voice, barely a whisper, echoing from the shadows. "Leave, or you'll never escape." The house was changing. Every corner, every room, seemed to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. The shadows grew longer, deeper. They moved. It wasn't just the walls now, the shadows were alive. That evening, Steven sat alone in the living room, his eyes scanning the corners, feeling their pull. It was as though the shadows were whispering, talking to each other. And then, as if in response to his thoughts, a shape slowly formed in the far corner. It was tall. Thin. And it watched. For a moment, Steven thought it might be one of the children playing tricks, but then it shifted, unnaturally. Its outline wavered like smoke in the air. Slowly, the shadows around it deepened, swirling. And then came the words. "Get out, while you still can." Steven froze, unable to move. The air grew colder. The shadows closed in. And the house, whispered again. Steven couldn't escape it. Every night, the house seemed to haunt him in new ways. It wasn't just the whispers anymore, it was the presence that followed him from room to room. That night, as he stood in the bathroom, staring at his own reflection, something caught his eye. In the cracked mirror, the dim glow of the light caught something in the corner. A shadow. Too tall, too thin to be his own. He spun around, heart racing. But the room was empty. When he turned back to the mirror, the figure was closer. Its outline blurred and shifting like smoke. A hand reached from the reflection, as if trying to break through the glass, fingers splayed and thin, unnaturally thin. Steven stumbled back, gasping for air, but the figure remained. Watching. "Get out," it whispered in a voice that was both inside his mind and in the room at once. And the house seemed to breathe. Slowly. Deeply. Waiting. The house had grown louder. It was no longer just whispers or shadows, it was the sound of someone, something inside. It began softly. A low, mournful cry. At first, Steven thought it was the wind, or maybe a passing car's noise from outside. But the sound grew clearer, distinct. It was an old woman's wail. From the dark corner of the house, down the narrow hall, behind the half-open door, came the sound of someone in pain. Steven couldn't breathe. He hesitated, but the cry pulled him forward, an overwhelming need to see who or what was trapped inside the room. As he approached the door, the air turned thick, heavy with grief. The wail grew louder, more desperate. Through the door, a hunched figure, an old woman in rags, stood with her back turned, crying into the dark. And as he stepped closer, she stopped. Slowly, she turned her head, her eyes black voids. And she whispered, "You shouldn't have come." Desperation drove Steven to the attic. The house had become too much, its grip tightening with each passing day. He needed answers. The attic was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. The light flickered above him, casting strange, distorted shadows across forgotten relics of the past. In the far corner, a stack of old newspapers and letters lay forgotten. The top paper caught his attention, its headline read, "Strange Deaths at Union House, the Mystery Deepens." Beneath it, a letter caught his eye. The handwriting was faded, but the name at the top sent chills down his spine, Eliza Hayes. The same name that had been whispered by the shadows. As he read the letter, his heart sank. It was a message from the past, a desperate plea from Eliza herself, telling of the torment she had suffered in the house, pleading for someone to uncover the truth. But the last sentence stopped him cold. "If you find this, it's already too late. The house will claim you as it claimed me." After finding the letter, Steven knew something had to be done. But the house wasn't finished with him yet. It was late, well past midnight, when he stepped into the kitchen to grab a drink of water. The air felt thick. As he moved toward the sink, a sharp scraping sound caught his ear. The cupboard door was opening on its own, a low groan echoing as if something, or someone, was pushing it. He froze. The knife on the counter began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it slid across the counter, inch by inch. His heart hammered in his chest as he reached out to grab it, but just as his fingers brushed the handle, the knife flew off the counter, clattering to the floor with a deafening crash. The air grew even colder. And then, from the corner of the room, came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Something was standing just behind him, watching. But when he turned, the kitchen was empty. The shadows, however, seemed to shift, closer. And the whispering began again. "You're not alone." By the time the final night arrived, Steven knew there was no escape. The house had fully claimed him, and his family. The rooms grew darker, colder. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the smell of decay. As he sat in the bedroom, staring into the oppressive blackness, he heard the familiar scream again, a woman's wail, but this time it wasn't distant. It was in the house. A scream so filled with pain that it rattled his bones. He stood up, heart racing, as the sound filled every corner of the house, echoing through the walls. And in the shadows, he saw it. A figure, hunched, distorted, was sitting on the edge of the bed. The woman he had seen in the photographs. She turned slowly, revealing her hollow eyes and a mouth frozen in a silent scream. The room seemed to stretch into darkness, the walls closing in on him. And then, the voice returned. "It's too late. You belong to the house now." The house was dying. But not in the way anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just a building, it was alive, suffocating, and desperate to claim what was left of the souls trapped within its walls. As Steven stood at the end of the hallway, He watched in horror as the very walls began to breathe. The cracks that had once been harmless now spread like veins across the wood. The air was thick, and the house groaned as if it were alive, struggling for its final breath. He felt a pulse, a deep, unsettling rhythm in the floor beneath him. The house wanted him. And as the mist began to pour from the cracks, a shadow moved toward him, slowly, purposefully. A figure appeared at the end of the hallway, its features still blurred by darkness. It wasn't just the figure of a man or woman, it was the embodiment of the house itself. "You are ours," it whispered, 1,000 voices echoing in unison. The house was breathing its last. And Steven was its final breath. The house had claimed them all. Steven, his family, and anyone who dared enter its walls. As dawn broke over the town of Union, Missouri, the house was nothing more than a dark, twisted silhouette in the mist. The walls no longer stood firm, the house seemed to dissolve, its bones sinking into the earth. But the souls trapped within, they remained. Figures stood in the mist, their eyes vacant, their bodies no longer their own. Steven's family, forever bound to the house. Their spirits, once full of life, were now empty echoes, walking endlessly through the fog, as if they were the last remnants of the house's breath. The house, now a shadow of its former self, still screamed through the night. A scream that would never end. A warning to those who dared to listen. The screaming house of Union, Missouri, is never truly gone. And its darkness will always return. And with that, the screaming house of Union, Missouri remains a dark, haunting legend, a place where the lost souls are never free. For more true horror stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Only True Horror, where the mysteries of the unknown are revealed, one chilling tale at a time. Don't forget to check the description below for the sources of this story and the image prompts that brought it to life. But remember, stay away from the dark corners of the world, or you may never leave. Until next time, stay haunted.